الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على نبيه الذي اصطفى محمد بن عبد الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. ما بعد. Inshallah, we'll continue with reading from the book جامع بيان العلم وفضله, the compilation or the extensive compilation regarding the clarification of knowledge and its virtues, as authored by Abu Umar Yusuf ibn Abdullah ibn Abdul Barr al-Namari rahimahullah ta'ala al-Andalusi, who died in the year 463 after the Hijrah. And we're in that second chapter. We covered last time the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, طلب العلم فريضة على كل مسلم. Seeking knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim. And the author mentioned several versions of this narration through various paths. And he stated in the beginning that all of those paths have subtle defects and criticisms and weaknesses, and that the narration by itself might not be authentic. And we mentioned the statement of some of the scholars who deemed it, due to the abundance of its pathways, to be Hasan, to be a sound, acceptable hadith. And regardless if the hadith, its chain is authentic or not, by itself or in combination with the other narration or the other versions or the abundance of the chains that establish it, in spite of them being weak, regardless if it's deemed authentic or not, then the meaning is sound. The meaning is sound. And the hadith itself, it has a foundation. It's not fabricated. So the meaning is sound. The hadith does have some foundation, and it's something that is necessary, therefore, to be understood and explained. And so we understand why the author made this the quote-unquote first chapter of his book, because of the priority of this topic. If the conversation is about knowledge, the obligation of obtaining it comes at the foremost of that. And as we said, this chapter we were going to talk about what knowledge is obligatory, and we were going to talk about what knowledge is obligatory, as well as gather my words for a moment. The type of obligation, what knowledge is obligatory, as well as the type of obligation. And so last time we left off, and we'll repeat that last narration that we mentioned, which was the narration of Ishaq ibn Rahuya. So Ibn Abdul Barr, he says, وَأَخْبَرَنَا أحمد بن محمد بن أحمد وعبيد بن محمد بن أحمد بن محمد بن عبيد قال حدثنا أبو علي الحسن بن سلمة بن سلمون قال حدثنا أبو محمد عبد الله بن علي بن الجارود قال حدثنا إسحاق بن منصور الكوسج قال سمعت إسحاق بن راهوية يقول طلب العلم واجب ولم يصح فيه الخبر إلا أن معناه أن يلزمه طلب علم، أو أن يلزمه طلب علم ما يحتاج إليه من وضوء وصلاته وزكاته إن كان له مال، وكذلك الحج وغيره. قال وما وجب عليه من ذلك لم يستأذن أبويه في الخروج إليه، وما كان منه فضيلة لم يخرج إلى طلبه حتى يستأذن أبويه أو حتى يستأذن أبويه. Ibn Abdul Barr, he says that Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Ahmad, as well as Ubayd ibn Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Ubayd, the two of them said that Abu Ali al-Hasan ibn Salamat ibn Salmun narrated to us. He said that Abu Muhammad Abdullah ibn Ali ibn al-Jarud narrated to us. He said that Ishaq ibn Mansur ibn al-Kawsaj narrated to us. He said, I heard Ishaq ibn Rahuya saying, seeking knowledge is wajib. Seeking knowledge is obligatory. And there are no authentic narrations regarding it, other than the fact that its meaning is, in spite of that, the meaning of it is that it is binding upon him to seek the knowledge of what he is in need of regarding matters like his wudu and his salat and his zakat, if he has any wealth. And similar to that is al-hajj wa ghayruhu. And similar to that is al-hajj wa ghayruhu. Hajj and other than that. He said, and what is obligatory from that, i.e. from seeking knowledge upon him, then he does not need to seek the permission of his parents regarding going out in search of that. He does not need to seek the permission of his parents regarding leaving the home and going out to obtain that knowledge. And whatever from it was extra or superfluous, I can't pronounce the word, but extra is an S word in English that makes that, right? Superfluous. Whatever from that is extra, then he needs to seek his parents' permission before he exits to search for that, before he leaves, i.e. home, in search of it. So this narration of Ishaq ibn Rahuya, he is explaining to us that in his view, the hadith is not authentic in any of its forms, but the meaning of it is valid, and that it is necessary upon him to seek the knowledge that he is in need of. And as we said, some of the scholars, they express this by saying that which is necessary upon the individual in his night as well as in his day, right? Any of the things that you're going to have to do in your life, from the things that are necessary upon you, then the knowledge of those things is necessary upon you. وَمَا لَا يَتِمُّ الْوَاجِبُ إِلَّا بِهِ فَهُوَ وَاجِبٌ. Whatever the obligation is not satisfied except by way of doing it as well, then that thing as well is obligatory. Whatever the obligation is not established or completed or satisfied unless you do something else, then that something else is just as obligatory. So if making salat is obligatory and you don't know how to pray, then you can't make salat. Then seeking knowledge on how to pray is obligatory. And if making wudu is obligatory and you don't know how to make wudu, then seeking the knowledge of how to make wudu is obligatory. And so like this, whatever the individual needs, going back to the statement, it is binding upon him to seek the knowledge of what he is in need of regarding matters of his wudu or his salat or his zakat, if he has any wealth. If you have wealth, that makes it incumbent upon you to pay zakat. And this is something that a lot of us here in the West, we fall negligent in. We are very negligent about understanding the rules of zakat. And we are often encouraged to be negligent. We are very unaware of the rules and regulations of zakat as a society, while most of us possess some type of wealth. And so if you have any wealth, it is necessary to learn how to pay zakat. If you have money, if you have product, if you have animals, if you have crops, it is necessary upon you to learn the rules and etiquettes of zakat. He says, and likewise hajj and other than it. If you're going to make hajj, you need to learn how to make hajj. Ibn Rahuya, he goes on to say, and what is obligatory upon the individual from these matters, then he doesn't need to seek his parents' permission before exiting the home to accomplish that knowledge. Tending to your parents and being dutiful to your parents is an obligation. But that obligation falls secondary to seeking the knowledge that is necessary. And instead, the seeking of knowledge that is necessary is an individual obligation, as opposed to seeking the knowledge that is extra. Then this is a community obligation, as we'll talk about shortly. And hence, they compare it to jihad. And if the individual, as it relates to voluntary jihad, i.e. jihad where you are not necessary for it, then it's a community obligation, and therefore an individual must seek his parents' permission, as was mentioned in the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so here they're comparing the one who seeks knowledge to the one who was going out and doing jihad. And indeed, seeking knowledge, it might be even greater than jihad. فَلَوْلَا نَفَرَ مِنْ كُلِّ فِرْقَةٍ طَائِفَةٍ. So if there wasn't from every group amongst the soldiers a group who stayed back to learn the religion. So they say that Ishaq ibn Rahuya, he says whatever is incumbent upon him to learn from that, then he doesn't need to seek his parents' permission before traveling, before leaving the home to go get that information. If you live in a city and the only person who is available to teach you how to make salat lives in the next town over, you can travel even without your parents' permission to go get this information, because learning how to pray is incumbent, as opposed to learning Arabic grammar per se. If there's nobody in your city teaching Arabic grammar and you need to go learn Arabic grammar to further your studies, then you should seek your parents' permission before traveling abroad and going somewhere, because being dutiful to your parents is an obligation. Naam, he says, so whatever is necessary upon him, then he does not need to seek his parents' permission before exiting, i.e. in the path of that knowledge. But whatever is extra from that, i.e. the knowledge that you at this moment are not in need of, then he should not go out in search of it or seeking it, i.e. to travel and to leave the home without seeking his parents' permission. Now, قال Abu Umar, right? Abu Umar ibn Abdul Barr, he says, يريد إسحاق والله أعلم أن الحديث في وجوب طلب العلم في أسانيده مقال لأهل العلم بالنقل، ولكن معناه صحيح عندهم، وإن كانوا قد اختلفوا فيه اختلاف متقاربا على ما نذكره ها هنا إن شاء الله. Abu Umar, he says, Ishaq intends by his statement, and Allah knows best, that this hadith regarding the obligation of seeking knowledge, there is criticism about its chains. There is criticism regarding its chains. There is criticism regarding the chains of it in the view of the people of knowledge of narration. The people who know narrations criticize its chains. But, continuing to expand upon the statement of Ishaq, he says, but what he means is that its meaning is valid in their opinion. Even though they criticize the chain, they deem the meaning to be valid, authentic. Even though they differ regarding it, and their differing is not that far off, right? Even though they differ regarding it, their differing is not one that is, far apart. They're very close. Even if they differ, they're still pretty much all in the same range, what they say. اختلاف متقاربة. They're ikhtilaf, they're not too far apart. And according to what we shall mention in this section, inshallah. Ibn Abdul Barr, he goes on to mention another narration. He says, أخبرنا عبد الله بن محمد بن أسد قال حدثنا أحمد بن إبراهيم بن جامع بمصر قال حدثنا المقداد بن داود بن تليد قال حدثنا عبد الله بن عبد الحكم عن ابن وهب أنه قال سئل مالك عن طلب العلم أهو فريضة على الناس فقال لا والله ولكن يطلب منه المرء ما ينتفع به في دينه. Ibn Abdul Barr, he says that Abdullah ibn Muhammad ibn Asad informed us. He said that Ahmed ibn Ibrahim ibn Jami' narrated to us in Egypt. He said that Al-Miqdad ibn Dawood ibn Talid narrated to us. He said that Abdullah ibn Abdul Hakim narrated to us on the authority of Ibn Wahab, who said Imam Malik was asked about seeking knowledge. Is it an obligation upon the people? To which Malik replied, I swear by Allah, no, right? Emphasizing it. No, wallahi, la wallah. And of course not. It's not necessary upon the person to seek knowledge. But the individual should seek from it that which will benefit him in his religion. Here, this narration, it's Imam Malik. We're talking about, as we mentioned in the beginning, what knowledge is obligatory and what kind of obligation is it. So here the statement of Imam Malik is referring to that extra knowledge, that fadila, that knowledge that an individual is not in need of at the moment. That knowledge that an individual is not in need of in the moment, then it is not obligatory upon him to go out and get it at this moment. But he should learn, even when he's not in need of it, that which will benefit him in his religion. This is the understanding of the statement of Imam Malik in this regard. Is it obligatory to seek out the knowledge that you are not in need of at the current moment? Then the answer is no. It is not obligatory you at the current moment to seek out the knowledge that you are not in need of at the current moment. But in spite of that, an individual should take time to learn the information that will benefit him in his religion, even before he's in need of it. Because you never know when you may need it. And maybe you end up needing it during a time where you are unable to seek it. And so by possessing it beforehand, you yourself and others will benefit from you when the circumstance arises. And so this is the statement of Imam Malik. What they mention here, they mention that the seeking of knowledge as it relates to the person, then there are two types of obligation. The individual obligation, what they call fard al-ain, the individual obligation. And then you have what is known as the community obligation, fard al-kifaya. Fard al-kifaya. An individual obligation is an obligation that is due upon the individual or necessary upon the individual directly. And there are no substitutes accepted, like offering Salat al-Fajr. Every individual is required to offer Salat al-Fajr, and there are no substitutions accepted. Nobody can take his place in that action. And then there are community obligations. And community obligations are such that if enough people in the community do them, then the obligation is removed off the entirety of the community. As opposed to if the entire community neglects it, then the obligation is upon all of them, and they are all sinning until it is established. And this is something that a lot of times us here in the West, we are negligent about. Yes, seeking knowledge that is extra is not obligatory upon the individual. As long as there is someone in the community, or should we say as long as there are enough people in the community that are doing it. Because it is an obligation, it is just not an individual obligation regarding the extra matters. But if there are not enough people in the community doing it, if you don't have enough teachers at your school to teach it, if you don't have enough students in your school to learn it, if you don't have enough people in your masjid getting the information, until the community as a whole has abandoned the obligation or is not satisfying the obligation, then everybody is required to do it until that necessity is met. And so a lot of times people, they misunderstand and they say, well, seeking knowledge in the religion is extra. It's not upon me to do so. But if it is not being done, then that sin does not get removed off of you because you were busy with something else. It needs to be in every community those individuals who establish the community obligations. And therefore, that obligation is directed upon each and every member of the community to assist in accomplishing that goal. If you have young students who can't afford to learn, buy them books, buy them materials, buy them pencils, buy them paper, furnish them a teacher, import someone who can teach them Quran, who can teach them how to read Arabic. These are things that are necessary upon every community. If you have an individual who can teach, but has to go out and earn a living, and if he doesn't teach, then the community will have nobody who teaches. Then the community should work together to help him not need to work so he can teach. Not to take care of him and not for him to look at it as a job or a source of income, but because if he does not do it, then the obligation will not get done. And upon that individual, if he is able to do it, is to undertake that responsibility and not chase an increase in the dunya and an extra in the dunya above the obligation that is necessary upon him to teach when his needs have been met. These are all things that it's important to understand when we talk about the difference between an individual obligation and a community obligation. Because a community obligation can end up being an individual obligation with the negligence of the community. In the same way, you would have to spend money or time or effort to establish the obligations that are individual, you have to do so for the community if it is not sufficed. Building a masjid is a community obligation. If the one brother who toils all day long fixing up the masjid and taking care of the masjid is not enough, we need other brothers in the masjid doing it to their ability, assisting, so that that obligation gets met. The bills being paid, the community having a school, a graveyard, all of these things that are necessary upon the Muslims to establish. If it's not established, then all of us in the community are sinning to our extent. And we need to spend our money, our time, our effort in satisfying these obligations. Anyway, this was the statement of Imam Malik, that it's not obligatory to seek knowledge, but the person should learn from the affairs of his religion that which will benefit him. Ibn Abdul Barr, he goes on to say, he says, وَرُوِينَا عَنِ الْحَسِنِ بْنِ الرَّبِيعِ قال سألت بن المبارك عن قول النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم طلب العلم فريضة على كل مسلم قال ليس هو الذي يطلبونه ولكن فريضة على من وقع في شيء من أمر دينه أن يسأل عنه حتى يعلمه. Ibn Abdul Barr, he says, and it has been transmitted to us on the authority of Al-Hasan ibn al-Rabi', who said that I asked Ibn al-Mubarak about the statement of the Prophet. Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak, the famous individual from the Atba' al-Tabi'een, died 181, if I'm not mistaken. Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak. He said that Al-Hasan ibn al-Rabi', he said, I asked Ibn al-Mubarak about the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, seeking knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim, to which he said, it is not the knowledge that they are seeking, right? It's not that which they are seeking, meaning the affair isn't that it's necessary for you to do what the students of knowledge are doing. You don't have to be like those students of knowledge who have cut themselves off for the sake of knowledge and the acquisition of it and the learning of it, acquiring of it. It's not what they're doing, right? That which the students of knowledge are doing is not the obligatory act upon every individual. لَيْسَ هُوَ الَّذِي يَطْلُبُونَ. It's not that knowledge that they are seeking, right? But instead, the obligation is upon the one who finds himself in a circumstance, the one who falls into a circumstance from the affairs of his religion. He must ask about that until he understands or until he has knowledge. So the obligation isn't that everybody has to go to Medina, everybody has to go to Mecca, everybody has to go to Riyadh, wherever it may be. No, everybody doesn't have to do that. It's not what they seek. Those individuals, those students, may Allah bless them greatly, are the ones who are removing the individual obligation upon their communities. And this is from the mahasin of the Saudi Arabian kingdom, is how many of us here in the West, all of the people who like to badmouth the Muslim governments, how many of us here in the West have they sufficed us our obligations by taking from our communities individuals to learn the religion and sending them back here to educate us? And how sad is it when those individuals who Allah has blessed them to learn something from the affairs of this religion and given them that responsibility. وَإِذْ أَخَذَ اللَّهُ مِيثَاقًا, right? When Allah took that covenant from the people who were giving the book, لَتُبَيِّنُنَّ, He's given that responsibility. How sad is it when we come back and we find ourselves fighting amongst ourselves for things that Allah knows best might be for portions of the dunya. Instead, it is upon the Salafi, the Muslim, who Allah has benefit with knowledge, that we nata'atuf wa nata'awan fima baynana, that we work together. And that does not mean that we work with the people of innovation. And it does not mean that we work with those who their obvious and apparent circumstance is that which is opposed and against the way of the messenger. But when our brother makes a mistake, that individual who holds him out to be Salafi, holds himself out to be upon the Sunnah, if he makes a mistake or he disagrees with us in an opinion where there is room to be disagreed about, then this doesn't necessitate us cutting him off. The point of it is that the kingdom, may Allah reward them and preserve their leaders upon goodness. Look at how much of the obligation they remove off of us. How many of us were blessed to go over, get some knowledge, and come back to our communities. And we wouldn't have necessarily been able to do so without those stipends, without those dorm rooms, without those scholars that are given a salary to free themselves up to teach us. So may Allah bless them upon our behalf, a great blessing. How many masahif are in our masjids because of what they printed and shipped out? Ma dafa'na, we didn't pay for them. Your masjid you go to, you pick up that little green mushaf and you start reading. You didn't pay for it. But that mushaf found its way into your hands. How is that? And where does that reward go back to? So be careful when you hear those people trying to turn the hearts of the common people against leadership. Be careful of what the results of that lead to. And it's not far removed from you all in your memory, the circumstances of Daesh, the circumstances of ISIS and how they were in those lands that they gained control of, and the stories of the people who came back from there with regret and with tragedy about the kind of lifestyle they had to live and endure when their leadership didn't put forth good. In any circumstance, this is the statement of Ibn al-Mubarak. It is necessary. It's not necessary for you to seek the knowledge that, i.e., the students are seeking. But what is necessary is that an individual who falls into a circumstance, who finds himself in a situation, he must learn the knowledge regarding his religion. He must learn the knowledge. He must ask about that topic until he has the knowledge of it. Naam. Ibn Abdul Barr, he goes on to say, حدثنا عبد الوارث قال حدثنا قاسم قال حدثنا ابن وضاح قال حدثنا محمد بن معاوية الحضرمي قال سئل مالك بن أنس وأنا أسمع عن الحديث الذي يذكر فيه أو عن الحديث الذي يذكر فيه طلب العلم فريضة على كل مسلم فقال ما أحسن طلب العلم ولكن فريضة فلا. Ibn Abdul Barr, he says that Abdul Warith narrated to us. He said that Qasim narrated to us. He said that Ibn Waddah narrated to us. He said that Muhammad ibn Muawiyah al-Hadrami narrated to us. He said that Imam Malik was asked, Malik ibn Anas was asked, and I was there listening, about the hadith in which it is mentioned seeking knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim. So Imam Malik, he said, how great is seeking knowledge? How good is seeking knowledge? Ma ahsanu talabul ilm. How good is the seeking of knowledge? But as far as an obligation, then no. Right? And as we said, this is talking about the individual obligation regarding the extra issues of knowledge. As far as him negating the community obligation of those extra issues, then this is not the case. And as far as him negating the individual obligation of those individual issues or those necessary issues, then this is not the case. but knowledge of the extra issues on the individual is not necessary. This is what is meant. Ibn Abdul Barr, he goes on to say, وذكر عبد الملك بن حبيب أنه سمع عبد الملك بن الماجشون قال سمعت مالكا وسئل عن طلب العلم أواجب فقال أما معرفة شرائعه وسننه وفقهه الظاهر فواجب وغير ذلك منه لمن ضعف عنه فلا شيء عليه. Maybe somebody wants to interject and say, wait a second, Abdul Hakim, you keep saying this about Malik, that it's not applying to this knowledge or that knowledge, and it means this and it means that. But the statement of Imam Malik is general. He just says it's not obligatory. Here, the author, rahimahullah, clarifies that point by saying, and Abdul Malik ibn Habib, he mentioned that he heard Abdul Malik ibn al-Majishun, he said, I heard Malik, and he was asked about seeking knowledge, is it wajib? To which he said, as far as knowing, or as far as awareness of the legislation, i.e. of the religion, and its sunans, right, those actions that you need to do, and the understanding of the religion, the fiqh of the religion, in the apparent sense, i.e. those obvious matters that everybody needs to do, then yes, this is wajib. As far as other than that, for those who are too weak to do so, then there is no sin upon them. فَلَا شَيْءَ عَلَيْهِ. Right? There is nothing upon them, i.e. for their not accomplishing that. Ibn Abdul Barr, he says, هكذا ذكر ابن حبيب ولا يشبه هذا لفظ مالك ولا معنى قوله والله أعلم. Ibn Abdul Barr, he says regarding this is what was mentioned by Ibn Habib. But this doesn't really resemble the statement of Imam Malik. Right? This doesn't really resemble the words that Imam Malik would say. Nor is the meaning of it the type of meaning of his statements. And Allah knows best. Right? This is the narration. But Ibn Abdul Barr is saying it doesn't seem like this is very accurately attributed to Imam Malik. He goes on, he says, وأخبرنا عبد الوارث بن سفيان قال حدثنا قاسم بن أصبغ قال حدثنا أحمد بن زهير قال حدثنا أبو الفتح نصر بن المغيرة قال سفيان يعني بن عيينة طلب العلم والجهاد فريضة على جماعتهم ويجزئ فيه بعضهم عن بعض وقرأ هذه الآية فلولا نفر من كل فرقة منهم طائفة ليتفقهوا في الدين ولينذروا قومهم إذا رجعوا إليهم. Ibn Abdul Barr, he says that Abdul Warith ibn Sufyan informed us. He said that Qasim ibn Asbagh narrated to us. He said that Ahmad ibn Zuhair narrated to us. He said that Abu al-Fath Nasr ibn al-Mughira narrated to us. He said that Sufyan, i.e. Ibn Uyayna, said seeking knowledge and jihad are obligations upon the group, and it is sufficient regarding it that it suffices some of them, وَيُجْزِئُ فِيهِ بَعْضُهُمْ and بَعْض, and some of them can suffice the others from it. If some of them do it, then the others don't. And what they mean by some of them, they mean enough to where the necessity has been met. It is not one, it is not 3, it is not 10, it is however many are needed to meet the necessity. Sometimes it can be one. Returning the salams, you only need one person to do that, according to those who say that it is a community obligation. Visiting the sick, you might only need one person to do that. But establishing a school, you can't say, well, if one person is doing it, then it's enough. No, you might need more teachers. You might need an administration. You might need these other things. So it's not that it is if one person does it, nobody else has to. It's if enough of the community. And that's why Ibn Uyayna, he says, some of them can suffice others. Meaning if some of them, i.e. enough of them do it, then the obligation is removed from the rest. The Nasr ibn al-Mughira, he goes on to say, and he read, i.e. Sufyan ibn Uyayna, he read this ayah in Surah At-Tawbah, فَلَوْلَا نَفَرَ مِنْ كُلِّ فِرْقَةٍ مِّنْهُمْ طَائِفَةٍ. So there should be, or so why not let there dispatch from every group from amongst them a party or a small number, a ta'ifa, to learn the religion and to warn their people when they return. So Allah excluded from the obligation of jihad a number of people to learn the religion instead of going to battle, in order that they could teach the religion to their cohorts, to their friends and family when they return. And so we see that the knowledge and the acquisition of it is a responsibility that even has its place above jihad. And for this reason, some of them used to say jihad with the pen and the tongue is greater than jihad with the sword and weaponry. And in both of them, there is good. And in both of them, there is good. Naam. This was the statement of Sufyan. He goes on, Ibn Abdul Barr, he says, حدثنا خلف بن القاسم قال حدثنا محمد بن أحمد بن كامل أو ابن كامل قال حدثنا أحمد بن محمد بن رشدين قال سمعت أحمد بن صالح أو سمعت أحمد بن صالح وسئل عما جاء في طلب العلم فريضة على كل مسلم من عما جاء في طلب العلم فريضة على كل مسلم فقال أحمد معناه عندي إذا قام به قوم سقط عن الباقين مثل الجهاد. Ibn Abdul Barr, he says that Khalaf ibn Qasim narrated to us, he said that Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn Kamil narrated to us, he said that Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Rashdeen narrated to us, he said that I heard Ahmad ibn Salihin, and he was asked about what has come regarding seeking knowledge as an obligation upon every Muslim. So Ahmad ibn Salih, he said, the meaning of it, in my opinion, is that if a number of people do it, establish it, the obligation falls off of the rest. Similar to jihad. Ibn Abdul Barr, he says, أخبرنا عبد الله بن محمد أخبرنا عبد الله بن محمد ابن عبد المؤمن قال أخبرنا أبو علي الحسن ابن محمد بن عثمان الفسوي ببغداد قال حدثنا أبو يوسف يعقوب بن سفيان الفسوي قال سمعت علي بن الحسن بن شقيق قال قلت لابن المبارك ما الذي لا يسع المؤمن من تعليم العلم إلا أن يطلبه وما الذي يجب عليه أن يتعلمه قال لا يسعه أن يقدم على شيء إلا أن يقدم أو it could be يقدم أن يقدم على شيء إلا بعلم ولا يسعه حتى يسأل. Ibn Abdul Barr, he says that Abdullah ibn Muhammad ibn Abdul Mu'min informed us. He said that Abu Ali al-Hasan ibn Muhammad ibn Uthman al-Fasawi informed us in Baghdad. He said that Abu Yusuf Yaqub ibn Sufyan al-Fasawi narrated to us. He said that I heard Ali ibn al-Hasan ibn Shaqiq saying that I said to Ibn al-Mubarak, what is necessary upon the believer that he learn from matters of knowledge, or what is it no excuse upon the believer except that he learn it from the matters of knowledge? What is there no room for the believer to abandon the acquisition of the knowledge of it? What is there no room, no excuse for the believer to abandon the acquisition of knowledge of it? And what is incumbent upon him that he learn? To which Ibn al-Mubarak, he replied, there is no excuse for him to embark upon anything without knowledge. لا يسعه أن يقدم على شيء إلا بعلم. There is no room for him to do anything, to present himself for anything without knowledge. And there is no excuse unless he asks. Right? There's no reason, there's no room for him to do anything other than ask when it's one of those matters that he needs to do. When you find yourself needing to do something, then that knowledge is incumbent. Now, we're finishing up. I don't know if we'll even finish this chapter today. There's still more pages. Ibn Abdul Barr, he says, قد أجمع العلماء على أن من العلم ما هو فرض متعين على كل على كل امرئ في خاصة نفسه ومنه ما هو فرض على الكفاية إذا قام به قائم سقط فرضه عن أهل ذلك الموضع. Ibn Abdul Barr, he says that the scholars are all in agreement. There is unanimous agreement from the scholars that from knowledge there is that which is incumbent upon every individual in their own selves, that they have to individually know that information. And from it is that which is obligatory in a way that is sufficient, meaning that if enough individuals establish it, then the obligation falls off the rest of the people of that location. If enough of individuals establish it, then the obligation falls off the rest of the people of that location. He goes on to say, واختلفوا في تلخيص ذلك والذي يلزم الجميع فرضه من ذلك وما لا يسع الإنسان جهله من جملة الفرائض المفترضة عليه نحو الشهادة باللسان والإقرار بالقلب بأن الله وحده لا شريك له ولا شبه له ولا مثل له لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. طيب, we'll stop at this amount because here, after clarifying the types of obligation, we now know what kind of knowledge is obligatory. It's the knowledge that every individual needs. That knowledge is obligatory upon every individual. And from the knowledge is that which is considered extra. Then that knowledge is obligatory upon the community. If enough of the community does it, then the rest of the people of that location are excused. After clarifying that, the author is now going to give us the details of what are these different fields of study. What fields of study does he view are incumbent upon the individual? And what fields are those that might be incumbent upon the community? And he's going to give us some examples of those things. And so we'll pick up next time with those examples that he mentions regarding what is obligatory upon the individual, as well as what is obligatory upon the community and the group. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم وسبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.